Greetings. My name is Mark Ream, the Director of Counseling at ASU Counseling Services, and I am going to talk to you today about suicide prevention. Due to the state of the world and the situation we all find ourselves in, mental health issues and stressors are on the rise, and so is suicide. So, we are going to talk about this most important topic and how to prevent suicide for ourselves, our friends, our campus community. So, the CDC shares the statistics that 1 in 5 people experience a mental health condition. And I would say, especially now, this is something we need to pay attention to. So, as we're going about our training, I want you to think about you as someone who is going to be a gatekeeper, a helper for those in their lives. All right, so this is actually a 2-hour presentation that I'm going to boil down into about 30 to 40. We're going to go through this information rapidly, but we're also going to try to make sure that you have signs, some of the things to look out for, so that we can all save lives. All right, so when we're talking about suicide, it is a it brings up a lot of things inside of us. Not many of people in society are very comfortable talking about this topic. We think that if we talk about it, it actually might cause people to kill themselves even more. But that is not true, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But so picture yourself in front of one of your friends or even an acquaintance who's maybe said something like, I'm thinking of killing myself, or I'm not sure I want to continue to do this anymore. So if you're a human being, which we all are, some of the normal reactions that you may have is fear, denial, like, no way, you can't do that. That would never happen. Shock, anger. A lot of times we will get angry at a suicidal person because we're like, how could you possibly do that to all the people in your life? And again, that's a normal response. However, if we are face to face with someone who's struggling that bad, that they believe that suicide is my best answer, my only way out, an angry response is definitely going to shut them down and not open up the lines of communication that we drastically need. So, again, someone who is contemplating suicide has a very heightened misery index. They have gotten to the place typically where they believe that the world and the people in their lives would be better off without them. So it's almost like they're doing people a favor. And so that is where we come in. We can be that bridge to hope and that person who is supportive and comforting. So I know it sounds a little scary up front, but we're going to give you some tools and techniques to be a helpful person. All right, so let's talk a little bit about suicide facts. So it is the 10th leading cause amongst all the age populations in the United States. 48,000 people died of suicide in 2018, with 1.4 over 33% in the last 20 years. And for our age population, the typical classic college student at 24, it's the second leading cause of death. One dies in this age range every hour and 48 minutes. 18 to 24-year-olds also have a 19% higher prevalence of serious mental health issues, but they're also the least likely to seek help, which is sad. 1,100 college students die every year by suicide, which is more than 3 every single day. 50% of all college students say they've had suicidal thoughts at some point, and I would say that's accurate, if not even a little understated. It doesn't mean 50% of college students have a plan to kill themselves, but it means that they've had that thought cross their mind and possibly have ruminated on it. The lifetime prevalence rates of threat to self have increased 9 years in a row, according to the Center for Collegiate Mental Health, with 37 with ideation and 11% are attempting. That is a significant number. Let's bring it a little closer to home in Texas. This data is from high school students. But in a class of 25 Texas high schools, at least one made a suicide attempt, so severe that it required hospitalization. Deep number. 18% seriously thought about suicide. 15% made it. These high schoolers are now college students. And so I would say the odds of you interacting, engaging with, being near, rooming with, having someone in your class thinking about suicide are pretty high. And so, again, that's why we're doing this training to help everyone become more aware of what to look out for and figure out how we can get them to the right place. So, here at ASU, every student who comes to counseling, these are our scores from last academic year. We score higher than the national average in all of these categories listed. And the most chilling statistic on this page is that our suicidal ideation rate for our students who come to counseling is 40, and that's 8% higher than their peers across the country. So again, this is not saying ASU as a whole, but this is saying the students who come to ASU counseling services, which is roughly about 10% of the student body. All right, so we need to talk about COVID and suicide. So that is one of the precipitating factors for much of our uncertainty, anxiety, and depression that a lot of us are feeling at this point in time. So the CDC did a study in June, and they studied over 5,500 participants, and they found that 25% of 18 to 24 time frame have considered suicide, and 11% of adults overall seriously considered suicide in the last month. There was another study by a different organization who has predicted that anywhere from 27,000 to 150,000 deaths will occur during this COVID time due to deaths of despair. So, a death of despair is basically defined as a death due to drug or alcohol usage, due to suicide, and the despair is typically from people losing their jobs, people not being able to provide for their families, the mask society, which creates a lot of distrust. Also, people are in dealing with starvation and poverty at levels that we haven't seen in a long time. So those are all very real, and they will probably stay with us for as long as we are in this situation. Another terrible quote from the director of the CDC is as it relates to young people, we're seeing sadly far greater suicides now than we are COVID deaths. And so, again, we all hope that this pandemic ends as soon as possible. I know every day, I mean, it's a different challenge, even if we're not directly thinking about it. The world is just different, and we're all figuring out how to move forward. All right, so what can we learn from the Titanic? So this is a cheesy slide. Obviously, I had to throw something cheesy in here. The reality is at our age range, again, the typical college student, 18 to 20-ish, um, peer pressure is a thing, and wanting to put our best foot forward is certainly a thing. And so most of us put on this nice, shiny face the outside for the world to see, like this pretty iceberg. But the reality is many of us have underlying traumas, underlying stressors, underlying depression and anxiety and suicidal thoughts that we don't talk about. And again, as a society, there's still so much stigma around mental health that we are encouraged not to talk about it because it's uncomfortable and people don't know how to deal with it. And so we kind of stuff it down underneath the surface. So that's part of what we're going to do today is help you understand some of the risk factors and warning signs that people may be pushing under the surface that we can't see. All right, so some risk factors include access to lethal means. Again, a lethal mean is anything that could cause deadly harm. So it could be having a gun on hand, stockpiling pills to overdose on. It could be having other weaponry like knives. It could be a car. I mean, the reality is that anything can be a lethal that way. There's a phenomenon with suicidology called clusters, and that is in a community where someone kills themselves and they possibly get notoriety or infamy from it. Other people want to go down the same path and receive some level of recognition, even though they are gone. San Angelo and even at ASU, we have a pretty solid level of mental health care There are several psych hospitals in town, and you, as a student, have access to us at ASU Counseling Services. You also have access to ASU Crisis Helpline 24/7 that we'll talk about at the very end. The biggest predictor of future behavior is past behavior. So if someone has a previous suicide attempt, they're 6 to 12 times more likely to do it again. So if you find out while talking with someone that they've tried to kill themselves before, we definitely need to monitor that situation and keep an eye on them and their moods and their behavior. Suicide of a friend or family member is another high risk factor. I always think it's counterintuitive, though. If my father killed himself and I felt the weight and pain of that, I would definitely think I would not want to do that. However, I'm also probably dealing with a lot of grief and heartache and heart and confusion and shame because why didn't I do more? Or I wish I'd have known about it. Or well, how could he do this to us? It definitely can push someone else over the edge as well. History of mental illness against people with depression, anxiety, bipolar, schizophrenia type disorders. I mean, that lasts oftentimes a long time, especially without treatment. And so, again, when we are operating under these conditions, it's easier to make impulsive choices. Similarly, with drug or alcohol use, I know no one watching this webinar now has ever used any drugs or alcohol, and they've always been sober, right? But if you haven't, we tend not to make the best choices when we are high or drunk or losing touch with reality. And so, sobriety is a huge key for people staying alive in terms of suicide. Probably one of the biggest factors that I should have mentioned with the COVID slide is that we're all feeling a level of social isolation. With the restrictions and lockdown effects of COVID and people having masks on, which again can create a lot of distrust and disconnection between people. I know a lot of the student organizations aren't really able to meet in person, and most of our lives are on WebEx, even the cafeteria. Or where we pick up food in the UC, there's no chairs. And so it's really hard to feel connected to people. And so that is definitely causing a lot of hopelessness and feelings of isolation. And so we need to combat that for sure. But if you have people in your life who usually are outgoing or engaged and active in dialogue and conversations, and we don't see them anymore, it would probably be a good idea to try to connect with them online or have a conversation with them. Many people, we've heard terrible stories of emotional, physical, sexual abuse as a youngster or even as a teenager. And these tend to stay with people for a long time, causing immeasurable pain and suffering. And so that is definitely a risk factor. And then someone who's facing a legal issue, or maybe they have to go to jail or something, suicide can seem like. All right, so what is this going to look like in terms of behavior? What are we actually going to see? We're going to see people talking about it. Who think about it, do talk about it. And they may say it subtly or they may say it directly. But if you ever hear someone talking about it or allude to it on social media, our hope and desire for you is that you would with them and then get them. So if they're getting a gun or stockpiling pills and that's widely known, we need to intervene in some way. Self-destructive acts like driving a car at 150 miles per hour, maybe engaging in really dangerous behaviors or sexual improprieties. I had a client once who, when we had a a water issue when San Angelo Municipal said, "Do not drink the water for a couple of days without boiling," he started drinking the water. It wasn't necessarily a suicide attempt per se, but he was very ambivalent about living and dying. Another one thing to distinguish is cutting. Cutting is definitely not always suicidal, and I would actually say probably rarely suicidal. Most people cut to transfer the internal pain and anguish to an external source that they have a little bit more control over. So, again, if you see someone who is cutting or has lots of cutting or scars on their arms, it doesn't necessarily like say, "Oh my gosh, they're about to kill themselves," but it's certainly worth having a conversation with the person who's engaging with that behavior. You may see people writing on their notebooks or social media with preoccupations of death, or maybe cryptic writings in papers that students are turning in. These can all be warning signs as well. We talked a lot about withdrawing, but again, when I feel bad, I feel depressed, I feel like no one cares, the last thing I want to do is put myself into social situations. So if you have people who are disengaging from life and people that they normally would love to associate with, we need to try to reach out to them as best as we can. Sleep is also another issue, kind of like drugs and alcohol. If we are not getting sleep, if we're under a state of deprivation, we oftentimes do not make rational choices. Sometimes, even with lack of sleep, you can experience hallucinations and delusions. So that is definitely a huge warning sign. Expressing no reason to live and no purpose in life, hopelessness, despair. These are all common parts of depression, and a lot of depression is associated with suicidal thoughts. Apathy is basically, I don't care anymore. So, kind of adopting that mindset of hopelessness and nothing really matters. So, I'm going to do what I want to do. And then other people experience heightened emotional arousal, such as irritability, aggression, agitation, anger. So, little things that used not to bother people. And then they start exploding. Um, could be another sign. A couple more warning signs are interest or disinterest in religion. Again, sometimes people that have chosen and decided, I'm going to kill myself, become very interested in thinking maybe I'm going to go meet a former loved one who's died, or some people who may have different backgrounds in religion would say, I'm not going to think about it. Giving away their prized possession, something they love, not going to need it anymore. And then a sudden increase or decrease in academic performance. It's kind of strange to think that people who have decided to kill themselves would improve their academic performance, but a lot of times they want to leave some kind of positive legacy behind. And so again, I wouldn't necessarily like freak out if your student starts, getting all A's and doing fantastic work, but it might be a conversation to have. High risk impulsive behavior. We talked about that in the last slide. And then drug and alcohol relapse and abuse. And then when our body is carrying so much stress, we build up cortisol levels, and our body has to contain that somehow. The best thing that we can do is we can let it out by talking it out with a trusted person in our lives or a counselor. Definitely do some other healthy behaviors like getting outside, getting some exercise, being around green, eating well, getting some regular sleep. Otherwise, if we don't, we're building up this volcano inside of our bodies. And these are some of the consequences. We have changes in sleep and eating patterns because our body cannot rest. Our mind starts racing. We get chronic headaches and other maladies in our body, like stomach problems and even menstrual irregularities. All right, so what are some situations that people might be going through to be more at risk for suicide? Is being expelled or put on probation. Again, this could be legal, but if I'm struggling in school and my parents expect me to do well, that is a very scary thought, and I certainly don't want to tell them. So it might be easier for me just a recent unwanted move. Again, that may be campus, or that may be fearing leaving campus. I know we've heard several stories from students who are afraid that we're going to close down again, and for not everyone, home is not a great place. So that is on the back of a lot of people's minds, and we want to be sensitive to that. A loss of any major relationship. Again, this might not mean death. This might mean a relationship breakup, or it might mean my friend just moved far away and now I have even less social support. If someone does die by suicide, we talked about that. That is a high risk factor. Um, Family problems and alienation. Again, if people have to go home, if people are living most of their lives online, and then home is not good either, it's like, where in this world is there a comfortable spot for me? I am feeling so much pain and I want it to end. Diagnosis of a serious or terminal illness. Again, if someone has a life threatening condition, they may opt to end their life a little bit early. And then I think we all experience this to some degree, but we are all going through an I mean, I don't know if it's unexplained, but it's a loss of freedom. I mean, our world has many restrictions that we have not faced before. We are not as free to move about as we once did. And that is a big part of the deaths of despair. Many of us cannot get jobs the way that we used to in the past, and people are facing all sorts of different kinds of stressors related to that. Few more situational warning signs. Again, this college age especially, we're past high school, but we still have a lot of peer pressure, and we have a lot of need to fit in and feel like a part of a group. And there's also lots of opportunity for embarrassment, humiliation, bullying, and cyberbullying. We know that many people have killed themselves due to. We know that it's easier to make fun of and not act like a due to online disinhibition effect, where people will say things and do things that they normally wouldn't because they feel a little less inhibited being behind a screen. Disappointment, rejection, those things add up, build up if you've experienced a lifetime of that. We hear lots of terrible bullying stories from kids who are now in college who felt it through elementary school, middle school, high school, and now it's even happening here. And for some people, that is more than they can handle. Financial problems, we've hit on that, but a financial problem is so hard because I mean it never really goes away. You have certain obligations and duties to pay things, and if I don't, maybe I don't feed my family or I don't pay my bills, and my car gets repossessed. That is a very hard cycle to deal with. We hear this every single day. I swear 99% of students who come into counseling say the same thing. I don't want to be a burden on others. I don't want to talk about my problems. I don't want to make them feel bad for me. I don't want to be judged. And that's a very real thing. Again, but what happens when we do that is we are saving up all that stress for ourselves. So if we all just operated from this place of we all struggle sometimes, and we all need help sometimes, maybe we would be a little bit more likely to break the stigma and talk about our stuff. Again, feeling trapped with no way out. That's a hopeless cycle. All right, we talked a little bit about this, but some more warning signs related to college age students. This is a new environment for so many people. I would imagine many freshmen are going to be watching this video, but you've already experienced this first month of a new city, possibly a new roommate, a new set of buildings and schedules and expectations to learn. That is a lot of challenging things all at one time, especially with some of the other restrictions that we're facing. Lack of coping and social skills. Again, a lot of people don't have a lot of mental health exposure in high school classes. Maybe you have a health or wellness class, but we don't really learn a lot about what can we do to cope and how can we learn how to connect socially with people. The academics, I mean, again, for most students coming to a university, there is a higher level of expectation and work, especially in this online learning environment. We've all had to adjust, and professors have to as well. And so there's not always as much direction or hope as we or help as we used to or we experienced or want to experience. And so we're all kind of figuring out this together. But there's also sometimes parental pressure to do well. There's internal pressure to do well. And so it takes an extra special motivation to be able to really manage all online classes. And so that is understandable. Feelings of failure or decreased performance. Again, a failure breeds a nasty cycle of I'm not good enough. What's the point? Maybe I'll end it. Again, obviously not for everyone. We want to be resilient and develop those skills to bounce back from life's adversities. But if we've had a history of failure and not measuring up to what we hoped, then that can push people over the edge. We talked about social sports, onset of mental illness. So age 18 to 25 is when many mental health illnesses become very evident, such as bipolar and schizophrenia, where you're having hallucinations and delusions. And so this is a prime time, as we saw from that early slide, where mental health issues can become really overwhelming for people. And then we talked about having a parent who lost their job. What we've learned over this first month is that many students are here physically, like I'm on ASU's campus, but my head and my heart are back home or with people who are, maybe they've lost their job or maybe they're really struggling. And so that is hard to reconcile. All right, so we talked about the risk factors, the warning signs, situational, and behavioral. This is a great slide for what people use to stay alive. And so this is something we're going to reference as we go through our 3 steps to keep people alive. But some things that people cling on to, regardless of their situation, is: am I responsible for other people or a pet? Do I have people who would be devastated if I left this earth? Do I have good self-esteem? What are some strengths I have that can carry me forward and through this? Do I have access to a counselor or a therapist? Which you do, thankfully, if you use it. Who are my friends and social support? Do I have best friends? Do I have support of a significant other? Do I have support of my parents? Some people will not kill themselves due to fear of going to hell or being reincarnated into something that they would not want to be reincarnated into. Again, if someone has those ideas, even if you agree or disagree with them, we would never want to challenge those or take those away from them if that is the one thing keeping them alive for the moment. And again, on the bottom of this page is sobriety. Again, and when people who are not of clear thinking, they're more likely to do something risky and dangerous. All right, so we're going to talk really quickly about the 3 steps to save a life. And the 3 steps are: persuade, and refer. So this is intended to offer hope through positive change, and you are that positive change agent. We do not expect you to be a trained counselor. Most of you aren't. Understandable, but we're trying, our whole goal is to figure out what's going on with them, help persuade them to get help, and then take them to get help. All right, so the question that we're referring to is: are you thinking of killing yourself? Do you want to die? Are you considering suicide? That is a question that we need to ask so that we know the answer, and then we can make the appropriate referrals and recommendations. Now, let's be real, that is going to be a very, very hard question. 95%. And as we stated earlier, this is not something that we talk about as a society. One of the videos I show in the live presentation talks about how it's even hard for doctors to ask their patients about suicide, or even how hard in the church. I mean, they definitely don't talk about suicide and things like this. It usually has a connotation of condemnation. And so, are we going to talk to our friends about suicide? Maybe, maybe not. So we need to figure out that answer. All right, so if you're going to ask that question, here are some just simple tips that we can all do. So talk to the person alone in a private setting, and no one is going to talk about an issue like this in front of a peer group, especially if people that are there that they do not. So find a place. Give yourself plenty of time. Again, this is not time to be checking your phone or be going through your to-do list in your head. This is possibly a life or death situation. And although, as the helper, I mean, you do not have the ultimate responsibility for what decisions this person makes, giving them some space and some time to talk about things that they probably have never talked to anyone else about in the world is a powerful gift. We're going to talk at the very end about all the resources you have at your disposal to refer them to. Don't anticipate the reaction. So here are some myths. Most people think if I ask someone about suicide, they're going to get angry, or they're going to feel accused, or they're going to be like, are you kidding me? That's crazy. And other people think if I ask them about suicide, it's going to cause them to do it, or it's going to suggest for them to do it. But the reality is that is not true. Most people are so relieved. Like I said, they probably have this huge volcano of emotions inside them. And here is someone coming along to say, hey, I care about you enough to ask you this hard question. And I want to know if you're thinking about dying. And so what we found, and I've found this over 13 years, is people, that bubble pops. It doesn't say that their world has changed and everything's hunky dory, but it says, I feel great. I feel better having talked this out. It's like a weight has lifted off my shoulders, being able to be honest with someone. So try not to anticipate that reaction, especially if it's negative. All right, if in doubt, don't wait and ask the question. Now, there's two types of people to ask the question. There are the very blunt, direct, forthcoming people who are going to just be like, hey, I'm just going to ask you this. I need to know, are you thinking of killing yourself? And then there's the people who are a little bit more beat around the bush. I need to build a relationship. I feel uncomfortable asking. I want to get to know you a little bit better first. And they might ask something like, hey, are you down? Or what's going on? And so both are great strategies. There's no one better than the other. Just know what kind of personality you are and try to work within your framework. Because if we're not coming across as genuine and being real, again, that can harm the trust level and their ability to want to share things with you. If you can't find someone to ask the question, find someone who can. And once they start talking, please give them that space to go where they need to go. Try not to interrupt and cut them off. The last thing we want to do is minimize someone who is being open about their situation. So those direct people that we just talked about, these are the questions for you to. You want to end your life? Are you thinking about suicide? Are you thinking about killing yourself? Straight and to the point. We want to get a yes or no answer out of this. The indirect, the relationship builders, the ones who want to wade into this a little bit. Let's start with, have you been down lately? Have you been so down that you've been thinking about harming yourself? Do you ever wish you could go to sleep and never wake up? So again, regardless, I mean, if they say yes to these questions, we have to ask further questions. So if you ask the question, do you ever wish you could go to sleep and not wake up? I mean, a follow-up question to be that can be is, I mean, does that mean that you want to kill yourself? We need to get a yes. If they're giving you answers like maybe, or I'm not sure, or I can't commit to that, or I don't really know, they're very ambivalent about life or death. I mean, we cannot just accept that and let them go on their merry way. And so, in that situation, we would love for you to call the cops or the mental health authorities, or if they're here on campus during the daytime, call us and bring them over to the counseling center, because we need to figure out the real answer to this question. All right, so there are a couple of things not to do. I'm going to read these questions. You're not suicidal, are you? You wouldn't do something stupid, would you? You're not thinking of hurting yourself, are you? So these are not great questions because they are leading the person to an answer. They're accusatory. They are judgmental. And basically, you're saying, like, be stupid and please answer no, that you're not going to kill yourself, even if the answer is yes. Again, you are giving away your fear and uncomfortability in the moment. So please do not ask the question like that, because they're probably not going to be. All right, so the second step, now that we've asked the question and we've got a yes, no answer, is to persuade. So again, listen to the problem, give them your full attention. This is called active listening. This is eye contact. This is nodding to let them know that this is giving some positive social cues, like smiling or giving them a little pat, or letting them know that you're there. You're nowhere else. Remember, suicide is not the problem, only the solution to the problem. So they've decided that suicide is the answer. Maybe they've tried 58 other things to make their lives better and nothing has worked. And so what our goal is to help problem solve on some level, and help them get to a place where they can get further help, because a lot of this may be above your pay grade. But we want to offer them hope. We want to help them see that there are some reasons for living. So again, focus on the other person, get out of your own head. This is something that we have to train consistently, even new counselors, because they are so worried about saying the right thing, asking the right question, making sure I don't say something weird or stupid. But the reality is someone who is in this state of mind is so wrapped up in their own thoughts and in their own sadness and pain that a lot of times they're not really that paying that much attention to what you're saying or not saying. And so the best thing you can do is be there, ask the question, and let them talk freely like we talked about before, because I guarantee they will have a lot to say. Most of you have probably heard this quote: people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So one of the ways that we can do this is to validate their concerns. And validation is simply um, being on their side, helping them feel like you understand and that you are there for them. So if someone drops on you, hey, I'm about to fail out of college, and if I fail out of college, my parents are going to kill me, and I don't even know what I'm supposed to do with my life. I'm probably going to end up on the street somewhere homeless. So what's the point? So they might drop something like that on you. So some of you may immediately want to be like, oh, well, let's just do this. Let's go talk to the professor. Let's go start studying together. And those are great ideas and strategies. But at that very moment, it might not be the best thing to say up front. It might be better to say, wow, Johnny, I'm really sorry that you're going through this. I had no idea how stressed and overwhelmed you're feeling. So you're giving their concerns validity in saying, hey, it's okay. It's normal to feel like this. And that, again, is building trust, it's building support, and it's building a bridge for them to be able to share further with you. Again, we need to watch our facial expressions and our body language because most of communication is done that way. So we do not want to have judgmental facial expressions. We do not want to say condemning things. A lot of times people who are in this situation do feel that wrath of judgment, shame, and anger directed at them, because it's like, why would you do this? Don't even think about it. It's terrible. And again, you may believe that inside, but we do not want to send that message to them. So remember that wall of resistance as you're talking with them. There are things that most everyone has to live for. And so we just need to help them identify some of those things. And again, this might be where the problem solving comes into place after you've built that good relationship and that nurturing relational pattern. And then finally, promise only things that you can make happen. So again, if you are a student and they're having academic issues, you probably can't get them straight A's. You probably can only do so much and say, hey, maybe we can go to the professor and talk about it. But the last thing we want to do is promise something that can never happen, because suicide doesn't always operate in a vacuum. Suicidal thoughts reside and come back and ebb and flow, just like everything else. And so we definitely don't want to give them a reason to be rejected further down the road. Okay, so I'm so disappointed. The first time I created this video, I had this guy named Kevin Hines, who is a Golden Gate Bridge suicide attempt survivor. The way off that bridge, and only about 1% of people do survive, and he is one of them. So I'm going to do a great injustice to his story, but I'm just going to give you a couple highlights. So this guy was in foster care much of his life. He had a lot of mental health issues, and some of the things we talked about. He had some poor relationships with people. He had bipolar disorder, so he felt a lot of highs and lows in his life. And so one day he decided to go end it. And he said he literally ran to the edge and leaped off. And he said, as soon as my hands left that railing, my first thought was, I don't want to do this. I don't want to die. And he was filled with incredible regret. And his other regret was, no one's going to know that I didn't want to die. And so he fell those 80 stories. I don't know how many stories, I'm making it up, but he fell a lot of stories, and he went down at least 80 feet in the water. And so because he was so desperate to survive and live, he swam as best as he could up to the top. His clothes were wet. He said his boots were wet, and he was really struggling. He could see the surface, but he was really having a hard time getting there. And he said there was an animal that started to swim up, and it was a huge sea lion, and was starting to swim around him to kind of create this weird upper gravitational pull. And he's like, I even tried to kick the thing because I thought it was a shark. And he said, but he looked down and it was a sea lion, and the sea lion helped him get up and get out of the water. And he was pulled out by the Coast Guard after that. But the most compelling thing, I mean, was that he did not want to die. And most people do not want to die, which is why I put this slide in. I wish the video in this area of persuasion. Whatever trepidations and fears we have about asking the question about suicide, people want to talk about it, and people do not want to die for the most part. We can be like the sea lion, who is someone who stands in the gap and pulls someone to safety. All right, some tips on how not to persuade. Immediately try to solve or fix the problem. Again, there's a place for that, and we want to do that. We want to connect them to the wall of hope. But if that's our first reaction, well, let's just do this. Or why didn't you do this? I mean, that has some blaming connotations too. Again, that may make the person feel even embarrassed. Definitely do not make the situation about you by saying something. I know exactly what you're going through. I hear this so often, and I think people have a great heart behind it. But the reality is, you do not know exactly what they're going through. And by saying something like that, you're putting the focus on you and you're minimizing their experience. So please do not say that. Definitely do not tell them to get over it, toughen up, and pull yourself together. There might be a time and place for that down the road, but right now, they need some support. And they already feel like they don't have it, and they feel like no one cares. That was another thing that guy from the video said, is that I felt like no one cared. I felt all alone, and people would be better off dead, or better off without me. And so he said, but then he said, but the reality was everyone cared, and I just couldn't see it. Don't be distracted. We talked in depth about that, and don't take the situation too lightly. So I know we all know people in our lives who we might consider like drama kings or queens, but most of the time, people aren't just doing this to gain attention. Most of the time, people are doing this because they're hurting and in pain. And so the way that I look at this over my 13 years of counseling, and I want you to think about it too, is if you're sitting with someone and you're having a conversation about suicide or depression or whatever, and you're going to go to sleep that night, when you lay your head on the pillow, are you going to worry that you did enough for that person? Are you going to worry about, oh my gosh, I should have maybe tried to get them to counseling, or I should have tried to get them to go to the ER? Or are you going to be able to sleep good knowing, hey, I did all I can do to help that person in the moment? All right, so the last part is refer. Literally, it's just saying, I'm concerned about you. I really want you to get help. Let's go together. Will you go with me to get help? Can I take you to see the counseling center? And the best referral is always involves taking the person directly wherever it is, because that way we know they got there. And again, it's going back to that your head on the pillow thing. I got them to the counseling center. They're the trained professionals to help someone. Got them to the hospital. They're under care, and they're maybe being observed by other professionals. That's good. Another thing is sometimes you can give us valuable information on things that the student may or may not have shared with us. And so, believe it or not, people tell us one thing sometimes and tell other people another thing. So we certainly welcome any information. All right, so here is some resources you all have. 911, obviously, if this is an off-campus or an after-hour situation, even, I mean, it can never really hurt to call 911. We do have several emergency rooms in the city, and we have 2 mental health hospitals in Rivercrest and in Community. Shannon Behavioral. Counseling services, ASU Crisis Helpline. So let me talk about this for 1 minute. This number should be in your phone right now. If you don't have it in your phone, I literally want you to take this out and put it in 325-486-6345. So it says ASU Crisis Helpline. I think a lot of people read that and think, well, if I'm not having a life or death issue, I cannot call it. Well, that's simply not true. If you call this, you are going to be connected to a mental health professional, and regardless of the issue, if you just need to vent about some stress, that's what they're there for. If you got sexually assaulted, that's what they're there for. If you have suicidal or homicidal ideations, that's what they're there for. This is not going to go in your academic record. It's not going to be blown up all over school. No one's going to know about it. So please call that number when you need to, day or night, 24/7. You might not need it today or tomorrow or next week, but you might need it when you're a junior or a senior. So it's always good to have it. Here's some other numbers that you can use. There's a National Suicide Prevention Line, the Veterans Crisis Line. There's a Trevor Lifeline for LGBT plus youth. There is text lines, chat lines, anything that you could possibly want to use. It's all free, and we're all out there to support mental health. The last thing I want to talk about on this page is filing a student's of concern report. If you know someone in your life who is struggling and you even have the conversation, it's always great to file a students of concern report. You can do this anonymously. I know sometimes we worry that the person is going to be mad at us for filing a report. But again, would you rather have someone mad at you for a time as opposed to them dead? I mean, I know that's a little bit dramatic, but the reality is if you file a students of concern report, people from the university, like myself and the police and student affairs are going to know what's going on, and we can use our resources to reach out to them and offer them additional help and support. So if you go to the ASU homepage on the very bottom, there is a link called File a Report, and please do that in these situations. All right, so let's say we're the best answer is you want to bring them over to talk to us. We have walk-in hours available every Monday through Friday. Please bring them over. We have one counselor assigned every single hour just for anyone who walks in. We are ready to meet those emerging needs. If people do not want to come, health or safety concerns, we are also offering teletherapy at this time. And teletherapy would either be a WebEx appointment or it would be a phone session. So we offer those as well. Just call us at that number listed and we'll tell you about the next steps. We can also consult with you. Let's say you're talking to a friend or a loved one and you're not sure what to say, what to do, how much intervention you need. We are willing to consult with you all and help you problem solve through that. If you go to our website, which is listed in the upper right hand corner above the picture, we have a whole list of hundreds of mental health videos that you can watch. They're short and sweet, they're entertaining, but basically you can search for anxiety during COVID, and there's most likely a 4 to 5 minute video on that. Resilience building, dealing with depression, accessing counseling, different things like that. Also on our website, we have a resource page where you can identify some great mental health apps that help you concentrate, help you do mindfulness and deep breathing, help you deal with depression and anxiety. So please check those out. If you don't follow us on Resilient Rams, Resilient_Rams on Instagram, consider doing so. All of our events, we have tons of outreach events happening all the time. And so please check that out to stay abreast of what we're up to. And then if you ever want to watch another training that maybe you couldn't see, check us out at our YouTube page. It's ASU Counseling Services on YouTube. Right now we have, I think, 19 trainings up there, soon to be 20 with this one. So please get familiar with some of those resources. And then I just have one more slide for you all. So this is very practical, kind of a summary of what we talked about today. I'm going to share this document really quickly. The flow chart. Okay. So let's say you were in that situation where there's a student of concern in front of you with suicidal ideation. The first thing we need to understand is the student imminent danger. Imminent danger means they are a very high probability of threat to themselves, death to themselves. So if the answer is yes, what we do is we call campus police if we're on campus. If we're off campus, we call 911 and we file an incident report. And then the police are going to take it from there and they're going to call a mental health deputy if they need to. If they don't, they're going to transport them to the hospital if they need to, or get emergency medical services. Now, if they're not an imminent threat or you're not certain they're an imminent threat, we're going to go through those steps. We're going to question them. Are you thinking of killing yourself? We're going to persuade them to stay alive and we're going to refer them somewhere. Now, if we go through that process and we're like, they're not suicidal, they're just having a really rough day, then we can refer them to counseling services. We can file an incident report. We can provide them with that information for the ASU crisis line. If they are deemed suicidal, we're going to go back up here to these steps here. Call the campus police or call 911. So that's just a really simple visual for those of you who are visual learners. Again, I know we packed in so much information in a short period of time. I thank you all so much for listening. And I hope that we all can become resilient ramps, which means we bounce back from life's adversity and we reach out for help when we need it. Because again, we all need help sometimes, and it's always easier to walk through things not alone. Have a great academic year. And if you need to come and see us, please stop by.